discussion of Bigfoot tales. I'm your host, D.L.Soucy, coming to you from the glorious coastline of Maine, the dawning state of the nation. And you get another Bigfoot tale slash wild man tale to share with you from the state of Arkansas. This one actually comes to us from 1856. It's taken out of the Western Literary Messenger, and it's from the month of May. Before I get into the article, let me just point out a couple of things here for my loyal followers and my new ones as well. Basically put, I'm not a Bigfoot expert, even though I have chosen the field of Bigfoot as a major genre of writing and videography at the moment. I'm primarily a folklorist slash historian type of person. I like to get into the old stories and see what was happening yesterday, because a lot of what happens today is actually based upon what we thought the way our lives went on a day-to-day basis yesterday. We learn based upon our experiences, and as our experiences change, we learn new things. So I want to state that Bigfoot, as we know it, Sasquatch, did not just simply pop into being. Bigfoot has been around for since beginning of civilization, essentially. There are stories that go all the way back to biblical times. And I'm sure there were Bigfoot around in prehistoric times. But one of the strange things about Bigfoot in and of itself is that we seem to think that he fits a certain profile as on one side of the scales being some sort of an ape, a wild ape, a near extinct ape, a rare ape. There's all kinds of ways to describe them, but those that sit on that side of the scale consider Bigfoot to be a primate type being of the ape families. Then we go on the other side, and there are people that consider Bigfoot to be a human. And I sit on that side of the scale. I didn't always. Originally, I thought it was some sort of a rare species of the ape family. But the more I learned about Bigfoot, the more I learned that this couldn't possibly be true. There just is not enough information out there that causes me to no longer believe that Bigfoot is, if he exists indeed, an ape. But there's plenty of evidence out there from behavioral observations and sightings reports that we can assume or presume, whichever word you wish to use here, that Bigfoot is a human being. And so that being the basis of my research, I went back in time to look for these so-called apes. And I found that up until the time or the era when literature such as Kipling's Jungle Tale with Mowgli, the wild boy of the jungle, and Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes came into very popular standing towards the end of the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century. These creatures were not considered to be animals, but were always considered to be wild men, wild people, primal people, if you will. And that's the basis that I have for my research. I look for the connections between the Bigfoot stories of today and the wild man stories of yesterday. And this is why I'm sharing these articles. Some of them are, as much as almost 200 years old. But there are many writings from even before that time where we have these hairy, wild people, these men of the mountains, in many cases, as they're referred to. have interaction with human beings, and somewhere along the way, these wild men stopped having communications, if you will, with uh, the normal human population. And that's the direction I'm going to in my research. I'm trying to determine where was the tipping point where everybody knew that these wild men were out there and they accept them as part of the community, to what was the point where they became a myth, a mythical creature, something that was just a fairy tale used to frighten little kids. Somewhere along the line, that break, that branching of what we call the wild men, these wild people, and what we call human beings, separated. And it wasn't in prehistory times. It was somewhere during the Black Ages, during the 1500s, 1400s, somewhere in that era. And that's where I'm directing my research towards anyway. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. A lot of people have commented on some of my videos that these can't possibly be true, and it's possible that they're not true. I don't know whether they are. I'm not Doctor Who. I can't jump in my TARDIS and go back in time and interview all of these people. But nonetheless, they are stories. They were written in print, and they were saved for posterity's sake. And I enjoy sharing these stories, and I hope you enjoy hearing about them. And I'm not going to revisit on this side of any article this subject again, so bear this in mind for you, those of you that are new listeners and those of you that are old listeners. The area that I'm researching in is not specifically the shock and awe aspect that many people want to see of Bigfoot, but the history of this primal people, these hairy human beings that live in the shadows of our lives. But let's get right into the article. Again, it's from 1856. It was published by the Western Literary Messenger out of Buffalo, New York, and it describes a incident that occurred in the state of Arkansas in the upper Red River region. And we'll get right into the article. The Wild Man Again. A correspondent of the Cato Gazette, writing under date of the 28th from Parailifta, by the way, it's now called Paraclifta. I'm not really sure when the name changed, or if it was just a simple misspelling in this article, but at any rate, it's Parailifta is the original name. Arkansas, on Upper Red River, states that the cold during the present winter has been in that region the severest within the memory of man. The rivers were frozen solid. The plains presented an unbroken sheet of snow. The writer relates the following story of an attempt to capture the famous wild man, who has been so often encountered on the borders of Arkansas and northern Louisiana. In my travels, I met a party from your country in pursuit of a wild man. They had struck his trail at a canebrake bordering on Brant Lake and the Sunflower Prairie. I learned from one of the party that the dogs ran him to the arm of the lake, which was frozen, but not sufficiently strong to bear his weight, which consequently gave way. He had, however, crossed, and the dogs were at fault. One of the party, mounted on a fleet horse, coming up, encouraged the dogs to pursue, but found it impossible to cross with his horse, and concluded to follow the lake around until he could ascertain the direction taken by this monster of the forest. On reaching the opposite side of the bend, he was surprised to see something in the lake like a man breaking the ice with his arms, and hastened under cover of the undergrowth to the spot where he expected him to come out. He concealed himself near the place when he had a full view of him until he reached the shore, where he came out and shook himself. He represents him as a stout, athletic man, about 6 foot 4 inches in height, completely covered with hair of a brownish cast, about 4 to 6 inches long. He was well muscled and run up the bank with the fleetness of a deer. He says he could have killed him with his gun, but the object of the party being to take him alive, and the hearing of the horns of his comrades, and the howling of the dogs on the opposite bank of the lake, he concluded to ride up and head him so as to bring him to bay, and then secure their prize. So soon, however, as the wild man saw the horse and rider, he rushed frantically towards them, and in an instant dragged the hunter to the ground, and tore him in a dreadful manner, scratching out one of his eyes, and injuring the other so much that his comrades despaired of the recovery of his sight, and biting large pieces out of his shoulders and various parts of his body. The monster then tore off the saddle and bridle from the horse and destroyed them, and, holding the horse by the mane, broke a short piece of sapling and mounted the animal, starting at full speed across the plains in the direction of the mountains, guiding the horse with his club. The person left with the wounded man informed me that the party was still in pursuit, having been joined by a band of friendly Indians, and thought that if they could find a place in the mountains not covered with snow, or a canebrake in the vicinity to feed their horses, they might overtake him in a day or two. And that's the end of the article. And of course, as usual, we have a couple of points that I want to consider here, in including this along with the wild man and Bigfoot connection. One of the problems that I have when I do these things is that a lot of people who were what we call hermits today live by themselves in the woods and the mountains and the wilds of the land, and they don't really care to have consort with human beings. And some of these stories include these type of people with this, so we have to look at the descriptions of the stories intimately and find out exactly what it is we're looking at. And this is just one of the many stories that I've read that the description of the subject in question doesn't sound anything like a normal human being. We look in one of the paragraphs. Represents him as a stout, athletic man about 6'4" in height, which is not abnormal. Actually, today it is not abnormal. During the mid-1800s, a man who was 6 foot tall was considered incredibly high. A man that was 6'4" high would have been considered a giant of the day. Today, we're used to seeing basketball players of up to 7 feet in height. Is what we normally look at when we're considering the height of basketball players. A giant today would be somebody much more taller than that. So we tend to think of Bigfoots as something that's like the 8 to 10 foot range. My research, historically speaking, suggests that the bulk of the Bigfoot that are out there are actually going to be in about the 6.5 to 7.5 foot range for a tall height. And I think that is one of the reasons why Bigfoot sightings as a whole are not as numerous as we find them reported to be, is because many of these average height today Bigfoot are not considered different, because somebody might see them walking through the woods not real clearly, but they're not really big, so they consider them just a hunter or a hiker walking through the woods, and they just pass it over. So I think we have a lot of misidentifications going on here on both sides of the coin. But anyhow, he was 6'4" in height, approximately. Very athletic, which means he was powerfully built. He would have had large shoulders, thinner waist is what we consider an athletic build for a man. But most importantly, he was completely covered with a hair of a brownish cast, about 4 to 6 inches long. He was well muscled and run up the bank with the fleetness of the deer. We hear a lot of stories about Bigfoot running up the sides of mountains and steep bankings with absolutely no problem. This part of the equation says to me that this is not a normal human being, but a true wild man of the woods, a Bigfoot as we call him today. Further down in the story, we read rather horrendous, where The Bigfoot, the wild man here in the article, saw the horse and rider and rushed frantically towards them, and in an instant dragged the hunter to the ground and tore him in a dreadful manner, scratching out one of his eyes and injuring the other, so much that his comrades despair of the recovery of his sight, and here's the most important part, biting large pieces out of his shoulders and various parts of his body. That in and of itself tells me that this is not a normal human being, but a true wild man or Bigfoot. Uh, there are stories out there of Bigfoot, to be polite, consuming human beings. We don't hear about that so much today. I think probably as time went by, they have learned to kind of keep their dietary habits to themselves. And then towards the end of the story, the monster then tore off the saddle and bridle from the horse and destroyed them. Holding the horse by the mane, broke a short piece of sapling and mounted the animal, starting at full speed across the plains. So, we have a man that is strong enough to tear off the saddle and the bridle. It didn't say that he unbuckled them, it said that he tore it off, which means that on the strength of this description, that he physically tore the leather strappings that go under and around the horse, and the bridle as well. So he obviously knew what these things were and had absolutely no use for them. If he didn't know what they were, then he would have considered them to be part of the animal as it was and just jumped on. However, this monster knew that the horse doesn't have a saddle and a bridle as a natural appendage to its body. So this indicates that Bigfoot does, in fact, have some sort of a ability to deal with horses. I've said in the past that I'm not really sure whether I believe some of the stories about mane braiding. And the biggest reason for this is because of the way that the horses react when you get into sightings that involve a horse Bigfoot interaction, such as the Patterson-Gimlin film. When the horses bucked when they came in sight of the Patty, the Bigfoot that was crossing the riverbed. So this leads me to believe that there may be something to them after all. There may be some sort of particular way about the Bigfoot that causes them to be able to control these horses and have them do what they want them to do. But anyhow, I'll leave you that with the story as it is. It's an old one. It's from 1856. So take it as you will. May have been totally made up. Might be factual. I'm not really sure. I'm going to guess at this point that there's probably a lot of fact to it. There may be some aggrandization of it, but I'm going to take it as a probable true tale and go from there and include it in my anecdotal research of the history of the wild man of the woods, or Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, whichever way you want to go with the name today. As far as I'm concerned, now they're all the same. And at this point, we have to actually get into the crux of the story, and a little bit of a letdown here. While this is a good story, I believe that a lot of it is true. I think a lot of it is aggrandization. Like I said, it's hard to tell. There were several papers that actually carried this story. I came across references to easily half a dozen or more. It was a big story at the time. It was a good filler. It was exciting, and there were a lot of details to it that could fuel the reader's imagination into believing that there was a wild, hairy creature that pulled a guy off a horse and took a few chunks out of him. But here's where we get into the problem of historical research. And this is where a lot of people in the Bigfoot community fall way short of where we should be, is because we're just simply not doing the research behind what we're looking into. And every good researcher usually will back up what they have with reams and reams of notes. And again, this is where we get into the problem here with this particular story. Number one, the name of the town that the correspondent is from is Paraclifta. There is no Paraclifta in Arkansas. Now, there is a Parailifta, which I said earlier is probably where this story actually came from, which is in the northern part of the state. The story is set in the area of the Louisiana-Arkansas border at a place called Brant Lake. There is no Brant Lake on the maps. I couldn't find any. I looked in some of the older topographic maps and some of the older land records and whatnot. However, down towards the southern part of the state, there is a place called Bryant Lake. It's a B-R-Y-A-N-T as opposed to B-R-A-N-T. So it's entirely possible that the original writer of this story misspelled. It's quite likely that it was done longhand rather than being sent over a telegraph out to the different papers, because you do have to remember this is 1856. Telegraph was somewhat in use, but it wasn't real heavy in use, and it was relatively expensive. So I'm guessing that it was probably a handwritten letter that the newspaper received, and instead of taking the time to check the spellings and all that, like they increasingly fail to do today, they just took it as is. Again, however, there is no Brant Lake, and there is no Parailifta. There is a Paraclifta, and there is a Bryant Lake. These two are widely separated, but Bryant Lake is towards the southern part of the state of Arkansas. So, for all intents and purposes, for everything that I've said in here, and as much as I want to believe that this is an actual correct article, I think we need to leave this at the point where it's an excellent story, has a lot of good points to it, but it's not one that we can use as substantive research material. There are too many things about this story that, and I'm not able to close up the loose ends like I usually can with most of the stories that I share here. But again, I hesitate to say that, but I think there is a grain of truth to this story. I think something actually did happen. I'm guessing that it's probably not quite so exciting as the story was led to believe. But I'm going to hold to the point that it's a possibility, and it probably is true, but I'm not going to include this as a fact in my research diary as I search the world for this source of these wild man tales. But at any rate, that's enough for today. I've wasted enough of your time rambling on here with all kinds of stuff, so I'm going to let you go, and don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and hope you come back more for more Bigfoot tales here on YouTube. And don't forget to check out my website at D.L.Soucy.com and see what's going on, and check out some of my books. Have a good day. Enjoy.